So a coolish start here, but generally a sunny start. Most places having a fine, bright day on Saturday. Not everywhere dry. There will still be 1 or 2 showers scattered across northern England, 1 or 2 for the Midlands, maybe 1 or 2 in the south as well. But as I said, most places won't see those showers. Stay dry. A little warmer as well. Temperatures in the south in the mid-20s, further north, high teens or low 20s. Thickening cloud in the northwest will bring a bit of patchy rain to northern parts of Northern Ireland and western Scotland during Saturday evening, but elsewhere, any showers disappearing. For most dry and clear nights, and again, reasonably comfortable, although temperatures will start off in the teens as we head into Sunday. Again, Sunday, for the vast majority, dry and bright with sunny spells. Early cloud across the northwest. That should tend to drift away as we go through the day. Perhaps a bit more cloud across northeastern parts of England. Again, 1 or 2 isolated showers come in the afternoon, but for the vast majority, dry and a little warmer. Temperatures more widely over 20 Celsius, mid-20s quite widely across the south. The breeze just picking up a little bit along the south coast. That will be a feature of Monday's weather. Quite a strong wind along the south coast, a little cooler in the east, but more sunny spells.
I'm back for this week's Friday night feast, and of course, you know me, I had to come back with a bang, didn't I? This week's challenge was one of the most terrifying and deadly yet. You can catch the full video on this week's episode between 7 till 9 p.m. I didn't just want to ease you into the weekend, no, I wanted to drag you into it kicking and screaming. It's the return of Patrick Christie's on Friday Night Feast, 7 p.m. I'll see you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening, I am Bev Turner sitting in for Michelle this evening. Now, we've all grown up with it, and for most, it's always been there when we've needed it. But after the COVID nightmare, the NHS seems no longer fit for purpose. Fine cracks have broken into giant fissures. So tonight, we've got a special programme on the NHS, specifically how should we fund it? I don't know about you, but I'm pretty unclear about how much it is propped up by public or private money. So let's talk to experts from home and abroad as we try to work out how to fix the NHS fairly. And let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. All of that to come tonight on Dewbs & Co. with me, Bev Turner. But first, the latest headlines with Tatiana.
Thank you very much, Bev. Good evening. It is 6:01. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Households struggling with the cost of living are now facing an 80% hike in their energy bills. Ofgem has announced the price cap will increase from just under £2,000 to over £3,500 in October. The government has acknowledged the rise will cause stress for many, but Prime Minister Boris Johnson says help is coming.
The pipeline of cash stretches out throughout the autumn. So there's going to be another £650 coming for every one of the 8 million most vulnerable households in October. In November, another £300 to help every pensioner, £150 extra for everybody who is entitled to disability benefits, on top of what we're doing with universal credit and the living wage, lifting both of those up.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says more focus needs to be on the energy companies and what they can do to alleviate the pain.
We need to have a freeze on those energy prices. Do not let them go up to those levels, and pay for that in part by a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies on those excess profits. Meanwhile, you've got a government that is missing in action, and I think most people looking in today would say that is unforgivable from the government in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
Merseyside police have released aerial footage of the moment armed officers arrested a 36-year-old man on suspicion of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Merseyside police also say their investigations are continuing at pace thanks to public information. Olivia was shot in her home on Monday night. Home Secretary Priti Patel says a package of measures will help both the community and the police. A man has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 23 years and 4 months for the murder of Lily Sullivan in Pembroke. Lewis Haynes was caught on CCTV with the teenager on the night she was killed just before Christmas last year. The 31-year-old strangled Lily after she rebuffed his advances and left her body in a reservoir. DCI Richard Yelland hopes the sentence will go some way in helping her family and friends rebuild their lives.
Lewis Haynes passed numerous opportunities to seek help when fleeing the scene of his crime. The life sentence handed out to Lewis Haynes today ensures that he will not be able to freely harm others in the community. Dyfed-Powys Police and our partnership will continue to work tirelessly to bring to justice those who perpetrate violence against women and girls in all its forms. This sentencing is no consolation for the family and friends of Lily, but I hope this will be a step forward in the slow process of rebuilding their lives.
Well, some breaking news in the last few minutes. The US Department of Justice has released court papers known as an affidavit that convinced a judge to authorise a search of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. The FBI search on August the 8th was part of an investigation into the potential handling of documents by former US President Mr. Trump. The affidavit includes evidence gathered by prosecutors and could reveal new details about the inquiry. Trump has previously denied any wrongdoing. The number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats this year has passed 24,000. Ministry of Defence figures show more than 800 migrants crossed in 16 small boats yesterday, the second busiest day of the year so far. That as the cost of the UK's asylum system topped £2 billion a year for the first time, following the highest number of claims in 2 decades. US pharmaceutical company Moderna is suing Pfizer and BioNTech for allegedly copying their COVID vaccine technology. Moderna is accusing the US-German company of saying the mRNA technology that they developed before the pandemic was copied. Moderna says it patented the technology between 2010 and 2016, years before the pandemic. Royal Mail's chief executive has apologised to customers for a disrupted service following today's industrial action. More than 100,000 postal staff have walked off the job in a dispute over pay. It's the first of 4 days of strikes, with more being held on the 31st, as well as next month on the 8th and the 9th. The Communication Workers Union, which is demanding a pay rise that's more in line with inflation, says it's the biggest strike in the UK since 2009. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Dewbs & Co with Bev Turner.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now we value it, we love it, and we clapped on the doorstep for the NHS. But with record waiting times, GP shortages, and a creaking infrastructure in some places, can we really still afford the NHS? We're currently all paying more national insurance to fund the shortfall, but is it time to hold our hands up and admit that the NHS cannot cope and we need to find a new way to fund healthcare? Well, with me until 7, my panel to discuss, Dr. Bob Gill, who is an NHS GP, the director of the documentary The Great NHS Heist, and a fierce defender of a publicly funded system. Good to have you here, Bob. And Matthew Lesh, Head of Public Policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and wonders if the time has come to at least part privatise our healthcare. I hope I've not characterised you incorrectly there, gentlemen.
No, I think that's fair.
We've got an hour to get to know.
We'll unpack it.
Yeah, OK, perfect. I also want to know your thoughts, of course, and especially like to hear your NHS stories, both good and bad. How do you think the NHS should be funded? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Now, the NHS is just over 70 years old, and like anyone at 70, it is not as agile as it once was. The UK has been held up as a model of how to provide free healthcare for all, but with an ageing population and rising costs, is it becoming a pipe dream? First of all, let's have a good look at the history of Britain's greatest asset.
The NHS started on the 5th of July 1948, the brainchild of Labour Health Secretary Aneurin Bevan. It was designed to provide free healthcare for all. It was the first time anywhere in the world that completely free healthcare was available on the basis of citizenship rather than the payment of fees or insurance. The plan was to put all hospitals, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, opticians and dentists all under one organisation. It would be funded by UK taxes. At the end of the 1990s, healthcare was devolved to the Scottish and Welsh governments, but still funded centrally. Spending on the NHS has always been a political issue. By the early 1950s, to deal with the demand of a growing population, the government introduced charges for prescriptions, dental work and glasses. Aneurin Bevan resigned from the government in disgust. Today, the amount of money the government spends on the NHS is 12 times than when it first started. In 2020 to 21, spending in the NHS was £121 billion. That's about £3,840 per person. Nearly £17 billion was spent on drugs. When the NHS began, it employed 144,000 people. Since then, it's become the biggest single employer in the UK, with 1.7 million workers across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Alongside Walmart and Amazon, the NHS has one of the largest workforces in the world. Around 15% of NHS staff are not British. While it can vary region to region, on average, out of every 1,000 staff, 854 are British, 58 are Asian, 54 are from the EU, and 34 are from somewhere else. Advances in healthcare mean one big difference between the start of the NHS and today, and that's the number of beds available. Per 1,000 people, the UK has 2.4 beds, Germany has 7.9, and the average in Europe is 4.6. Critics say the number of beds is now a problem and it needs to be increased. Protect the NHS was one of the mantras of the COVID crisis. People turned out to clap on the doorstep to support the NHS workers as they battled against the pandemic. But the crisis revealed the cracks in the NHS. With an ageing population, a skills shortage, and rising costs, critics say the NHS can no longer meet the original vision of free healthcare for all.
So lots to think about there, actually. It's interesting, isn't it, to look at it from that historical perspective. So let's kick off with the views of our panel. So is the way we fund the NHS through UK taxes the right way to provide healthcare? Dr. Bob Gill, let me come to you. I mean, you feel so strongly about this that you even made a film about the NHS, didn't you? Tell us where your politics lie on this issue.
Yeah, well, you know, it was about 10 years ago I started noticing a political agenda to privatise the NHS, and from that point I started to look into the whole matter. As a practising doctor, I also noticed that the system was starting to malfunction. After a good period of funding in the NHS, I was finding the care and waiting lists were starting to creep up. And then I found out about the Health and Care Bill 2012, which in law actually abolished one of the founding principles of the NHS, and that is the Secretary of State's duty to provide healthcare. So the legal basis for the NHS was significantly undermined. And
without much noise about that, really. Did that sort of go under the radar a little bit?
Absolutely under the radar. So it was dressed up as putting control in frontline hands, but that was not what happened. The NHS was broken up into structures based on the American insurance model. And we've just had gone through Parliament in July another Health and Care Act, which actually completes the transition to an American-style system of managed care. So, you know, the discussion about funding is important, but what we must realise is the point we are at now has taken 30 to 40 years to get us to, because our political class do not dare be honest with us that their intention is not to serve the public interest, but to turn the NHS into a corporate cash cow. And that's where we are now. Very fortunately for government policy, they've been hiding a lot of their reforms behind the pandemic. Everything is down to the pandemic. But we know before the pandemic struck, waiting lists were growing, the NHS was relatively defunded for a decade, the workforce suffered a 20 to 30% real terms pay cut, we had Brexit, which scared off European health workers, we had a 2016 industrial action. Junior doctors were warning, if you keep attacking our terms and conditions, you're not going to have a workforce. And guess where we are? And you covered in your piece at the introduction, we've lost half the beds in the UK. We have one of the lowest bed counts in Europe. There simply isn't enough beds or staff to provide care.
It's a bleak start, Bob, isn't it?
Yeah, but the key thing about funding, if I may just finish this point, the money isn't going to provide healthcare. A lot of the money is going to service private finance initiative debt, which was a scam to transfer ownership of hospitals to the private sector, which has happened. Alongside that, saw a contraction of bed capacity. For every new hospital built, it had a third less beds. So you had a covert bed closure programme, as well as a transfer of ownership over to the private sector. And we are now servicing the debt with NHS budgets. The marketisation of healthcare is sucking at least 10% of the budget into administration. And we've also got more and more outsourcing. So the money is not going to direct patient care. It's being siphoned off by private interests.
Wow. Matthew Lesh, let me come to you. Now, you're the Head of Public Policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs. What Bob has just described there is privatisation by stealth.
I mean, quite frankly, what Bob has just described there is a fantasy. There is no truth to the claim that there's this evil, nefarious plan to privatise the NHS. We know that the amount of outsourcing in the NHS has remained below 10%, was something 7, 8, 9%. It hasn't really changed in the last decade. There's no grand plan to privatise the NHS. In fact, more funding generally goes to GPs who actually aren't technically part of the NHS. We completely lose track here of a serious and adult debate about the NHS when we just throw out ridiculous claims. There is no interest in the political class of fundamentally taking away people's healthcare. There's no interest in introducing a US-style healthcare system. Even me, who disagrees with much of the political debate and says maybe we should look at other systems, we don't tend to look at the US. We look at the extremely successful healthcare systems in Germany, in Australia, in France. Now, let me tell you, in France, that socialist republic, they have 95% of people that have private health insurance, and that's in addition to a socialised healthcare system that delivers healthcare very practically for all. In Germany, they have a system of social insurance, also extremely effective. Now, there are other models and there are other ways. I'm sure we're going to get into this in more detail to fund the NHS, but I just want to get this fundamental point down. The NHS is not broken because of this idea that it's being privatised. It's broken because it's a highly bureaucratic, centrally controlled, inefficient system that takes more and more money. It hasn't been defunded. If funding were the issue, the NHS would be a massive success. We're looking at something like 40% more funding since 2010 by 2025. The money in the NHS goes up and up, and yet the quality of healthcare we get goes down and down. So it clearly isn't a problem about money. It's a problem about structures and design and the very nature of the system and the monopolistic, very state-driven system that the UK has chosen, and is very far from the envy of the world.
Bob, I must let you come back in.
Sure. Well, I'm not being paid by anybody to say what I'm saying. Matthew is from the Institute of Economic Affairs. This is a lobby group. It is a pro-privatisation lobby group. By transparency organisations, it's been described as very secretive in terms of its funding. We do know that companies, big tobacco companies, alcohol...
I'm sorry, you're going to get to the matter of this debate, or are you going to
and
try to
sugar
attack me
companies
personally?
fund the IEA. Now, this is not the qualification you need for people giving advice about how to run a health system. He also disparages what I just said, but he fails to understand that we've had passage of successive legislation, all of which marketises the NHS, and he keeps distracting us to the European model. But the people leading the change here, for the last 7 years, the chief executive of the NHS was a Mr. Simon Stevens, who was formerly head of United Health, America's biggest private insurer, and he was head of global expansion, and he made successive reforms to replicate the American managed care system. So Matthew might attack me, but he cannot challenge me on the facts. We had a Health and Care Act just gone through Parliament, which has created what are called integrated care systems, but these are modelled on American managed care.
OK. I didn't hear a personal attack, to be fair. What I heard him question was a potential conflict of interest from your organisation, as opposed to a particular slight against you. So go on, respond.
Well, I think the implication there is that I'm corrupt and don't really believe what I'm saying. Now, I have no particular interest, financial interest in the UK's health system. I have an interest of an individual who sees a broken healthcare system that sees tens of thousands of more people die from conditions in the UK compared to comparable healthcare systems in the US. And then I see this completely nonsense debate about this conspiracy theory. Yes, there have been various restructures of the NHS. No one's going to deny that fact. That doesn't mean that there's a conspiracy to privatise the NHS or to get rid of universal healthcare or to introduce an American system. That is clearly not the intent. That is not the structure. That is not what is going on here. And we can't have a serious debate about the NHS if we get distracted by this sideshow made-up universe about things that aren't happening.
So you just made something up yourself. You said compared to other countries we were poorly performing. America spends twice as much GDP per head than this country. It has a lower life expectancy. It has worse maternal mortality. It has a higher infant mortality. So compared to the American system, we are doing much better given the money we are spending. And despite all the siphoning off that consecutive legislation has enabled...
Look, again, there is no siphoning off the private sector. The amount of outsourcing in the NHS hasn't changed. Secondly, to your point, are you going to let me finish my point?
Have you heard of marketization?
Are you going to let me finish my point?
Have you heard of these things?
So what I'm doing, and this is, we always get this, we compare to the American system, but we don't, what I was comparing to was the European systems that spend similar amounts. No, they spend similar amounts to the UK, more or less. Some spend a little bit more, some spend a little bit less, but they get much better outcomes.
Okay.
And as the NHS, as the Guardian famously reported on the King study into the comparative healthcare system, the NHS does very well in every metric except for keeping people alive. The truth is, the NHS doesn't work effectively compared to comparable systems. Let's not talk about the US. I'm not interested in talking about the US because that's not what this is.
Because you want to avoid the direction of travel.
Listen, by the end of this show, we might have solved this problem. So stay with us. We've got two very big, passionate brains here on this topic. And don't forget, I want to know what you think as well, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I think what we all agree on is it's not working properly. We've got too many people dying too quickly. We've got too many people having bad care and not enough compassionate care. The question is, how do we fund it? That's what we're talking about tonight, if you're just tuning in. Right, let's take a look at one part of the NHS, because figures from NHS Digital show that in just 1 month, April of this year, more than 1 million appointments were missed, and that cost the NHS around £200 million a year. We're joined now by Dr. Anna Hemming, who used to be a GP with the NHS and now runs a private clinic. Good evening, Anna. Thank you for joining me. First of all, can I just ask you on a personal level, why did you make the transition from the NHS into private care?
So I've actually already, right from the beginning of my career, led a very varied portfolio. So I used to be an army doctor, came into the NHS whilst working within the private sector. So I've juggled many things all the way through my career. So it hasn't necessarily been a step from one to the other. But what became apparent to me were that the treatments and services that I wanted to give my patients were not actually available on the NHS. And probably rightly so, but it was where my career was going. And so I developed my own private practice.
So when you were working as a GP, was missed appointments a huge issue?
I think across the board, we've got, this is an incredible topic to discuss, but across the board, there are a lot of appointments, both in general practice and in hospital medicine, that do get missed. And there will be a really big range of reasons why, maybe linked to appointments or just forgetting them. But I think, and I did think during the time that I was a GP, that it would be a good thing to do to try and make it more difficult for patients to miss those appointments, and by taking deposits or a small fee or a cancellation fee if they missed an appointment would potentially be a good idea.
Rishi Sunak has said that he thinks he would introduce a £10 fine for missed GP appointments. Does that seem like the answer to you?
I think it's one potential option, and I think it should be trialled. The actual amounts and how it's organised is obviously something that needs to be discussed. But then if you also think about different systems across Europe, which I think has been mentioned already, people do pay a small amount of money to go and see their GP, but we also go to dentists and pay a small amount under the NHS for dental appointments, as well as going to see the optician. So somehow the general practice service, which is also subcontracted from the government, has missed out on this. So I don't think it's really something new. I think it's something that people do already, but they don't necessarily realise they do it.
So as a private practitioner now, how many people miss their appointments with you?
Very, very few. But then I have a system in place whereby, it's not in their interest to miss their appointments.
That kind of proves the point, really, doesn't it? Where people are abusing a system, perhaps because it is free. And I think sometimes it is maybe busy people who book in to get something done or to see a doctor. Maybe they feel better by the time the appointment comes around, and they don't necessarily think to cancel it, to phone the GP to let them know they no longer need that appointment for the sore throat or whatever it is, but maybe that can be changed with a cultural shift, Anna. Maybe it's about somehow encouraging British people to once again appreciate the NHS and not just take it for granted.
I think so, and I think a number of things have been made, talking about the medical contracts that junior doctors have and various things. And I do think that doctors and the medical profession has been devalued over the last 10 years. And I've seen it in my career and how patients have behaved towards me personally, but also towards my colleagues. And I'm not saying that doctors should be held on a pedestal or anything like that, but showing up to your appointment is one way that you can actually help the system, because if you miss it and you actually need to see the doctor, then you're going to take up a second appointment. And that kind of behaviour just can't go on because the system can't cope with it. There was another interesting point that you mentioned, and that was someone coming to see the doctor with a sore throat. I actually don't think the majority of people need to see a doctor with a sore throat. So maybe we need to have some kind of education going even into the schools to sort of help educate people what an illness is and what they can look after at home. Now, obviously, some sore throats do need to be seen. We can't sort of rule everything out, but I think people need to be a little bit more aware about self-care and what they should be presenting to a GP or a medical practice, walk-in centres and A&E.
OK, thank you, Anna. Dr Anna Hemming there, a former GP and now running a private practice. Now, still to come on this NHS special. Should paying for healthcare be our own responsibility, or are we inevitably moving towards having private health insurance like the US? We'll be going stateside in just a moment to find out what that might look like, and more debate from my panellists after the break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
I'm back for this week's Friday night feast, and of course, you know me, I had to come back with a bang, didn't I? This week's challenge was one of the most terrifying and deadly yet. You can catch the full video on this week's episode between 7 till 9 p.m. I didn't just want to ease you into the weekend, no, I wanted to drag you into it kicking and screaming. It's the return of Patrick Christie's on Friday Night Feast, 7 p.m. I'll see you there.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, where we are trying to fix the nation with a special on the NHS. And my panel is Dr. Bob Gill, who is an NHS GP and also the director of the documentary The Great NHS Heist, and Matthew Lesh, head of public policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs. OK, so the original vision for the NHS was free healthcare for all, funded by UK taxes. But we now have a massive ageing population and the NHS is costing billions. In a moment, we're going to hear about the way the US funds its healthcare. But first, let's just have a look at what different countries spend on the ability to keep their people healthy. Basically, these figures are per head of the population. America is at the top with nearly £10,000 per person. Germany spends $4,473 per head. And then there's the UK, where we spend $3,840 per person. France spends slightly less at just over $3,700. And finally, Australia spends the least at $2,218, which I find quite surprising. When we talk about changing the way the NHS is funded, people immediately think of the private insurance system in the US. But how does that system really work? Michael Cannon is Director of Health Policy Studies at the Cato Institute in Washington and joins us now. Michael, good evening. Hi. Can you just explain to us Brits with our luxurious free at the point of contact NHS how the American system works?
So the American system is a hodgepodge of different types of socialized medicine, really. We have basically every type of socialized medicine represented here in the United States. We have a British-style NHS for veterans. We call it the Veterans Health Administration. We have a German-style system of employment-based health insurance that covers about 56% of U.S. residents. We have a Canadian-style system that covers the low-income residents in the United States. And we have something that's sort of socialized medicine that almost no other country has, which is a highly centralized program that administers healthcare for the entire elderly population in the United States. We call that the Medicare program. And with all these different types of socialized medicine in the United States, we don't really have a market-based system. We may call some of the health insurance here private, but it's not really private if the government is compelling you to enroll in a health plan that your employer offers, for example. And so when you look at the share of health spending that government controls in the UK, the OECD says government controls about 79% of health spending in the UK. In the United States, the OECD says government controls 83%. So that right there should give you an indication that what we have is not a market system in the United States. It is a heavily government-dominated system. It's just that the government makes different decisions with the powers that it has. For example, it steps on the gas when it comes to spending, and that's why the United States, or one of the reasons why the United States outspends all other advanced nations on healthcare. It's because government requires it to do so.
You also have, I believe, a lot of people who find themselves bankrupt when life introduces the misfortune, perhaps, to undergo some sort of illness or accident, which means that they cannot afford their care. That, to us as Brits, is still quite a shocking state of affairs. How common is that, Michael, for people to genuinely find themselves in financial hardship because they get unwell?
So I guarantee you, I've been listening to the show, and I guarantee you that my criticisms of the U.S. healthcare sector are much greater than anyone else on this program. And that is one of them, is that people too often have to file bankruptcy because of the high prices that healthcare providers charge here in the United States. Over my shoulder is a book that the Cato Institute published about exactly that problem. And it turns out that the reason for those high and rising excessive prices is, again, not market forces. It's because of all the things that government does to raise the price of healthcare, to step on the gas when it comes to health spending and higher prices that leaves a lot of people in the lurch if they don't have health insurance, or even if they do have health insurance, because there are a lot of people who have found that their health insurance does not cover the excessive and in some cases unconscionably high prices that healthcare providers charge in this country.
Just to give us an idea, do you know, Michael, kind of what a person would pay to, say, maybe see our equivalent of a GP, just a general doctor's appointment? What will that cost them on their private health insurance?
You know, one of the most frustrating things about the U.S. health sector is how opaque those prices are. It can cost anywhere from $0 out of pocket if you have insurance that covers everything. The U.S. Medicaid program provides first dollar coverage, and some private, so-called private health insurance plans do that as well. Many elderly Americans have Medicare and then purchase supplemental insurance so that they don't have to pay anything when they go to the doctor. Or you could have some sort of form of copayment. Or if you're a cash paying customer and you want to find out how much it costs just to have a primary care visit, oftentimes the doctors cannot or will not tell you in advance because they don't even know, and they're engaged in this very costly game of trying to get the highest prices they possibly can out of insurance companies, and because that's where their money is coming from primarily, and they are therefore not transparent about the prices that they charge to patients. So the answer to how much a patient could pay out of pocket for a doctor's visit could range from $0 to a few $100s.
Well, thank you very much. It's always illuminating to hear how the American system works for us here. Michael Cannon, their Director of Health Policy Studies at the Cato Institute in Washington. I'm going to come to you, Matthew, because what you heard then about the opaqueness, let's say, of this funding system, this is why people get worried about a private health system, as we heard then. It isn't really entirely that, because you feel like ill people are vulnerable people, and ill people can therefore have advantage taken of them. And when somebody who is an expert in that system can't even tell you how much it costs to go to a GP, that's when the likes of Bob and me realise that it could potentially descend into being an absolute racket.
Look, I completely agree. I'm not an advocate of the American healthcare system. In fact, even most American healthcare analysts, from whatever their persuasion, that was a libertarian think tank, Cato, that we just heard from in the US. They're not a particular fan of the American healthcare system. It is a fundamentally broken system in so many complex ways. And that's why I think it's, quite frankly, it's interesting to hear more of the details. I think we get a very basic version of it in the UK media, that there's just some not really how it works in practice. But I don't think it's a useful starting point when considering debates about the NHS or making comparisons to other countries.
But we feel like we're going that way.
Well, I just don't think... I know that there's a political claim that the UK is going that way, but I don't think that's true. I just don't think it seems likely whatsoever that politically you could, even if you wanted to introduce an American system. The American system has its own history, its own context. The UK system has its own history, its own context. The UK has universal healthcare, which has extremely strong support. It's something that I fully support. I think we should absolutely have healthcare for everyone and ensure the government supports and make sure that happens. So I don't think the American system, which is traditionally more individualist, although with heavy levels of government intervention and subsidy, is a particularly interesting comparison point to the UK.
Go on, Bob. I know I can hear your brain whirring silently beside me.
Just to pick up on the last thing you said, both the IEA and the Cato Institute do not advocate universal healthcare. So let's put that on the table. What we heard about the American system, well, the UK system is now designed to flip into a Medicare system, which is state-funded, but privately operated and privately provided. NHS hospitals are now being set up as hospital chains. These will become available for private equity firms and large banks and financial institutions to own the hospitals. We have a system of administration and bureaucracy which resembles the managed care system, all of which Matthew doesn't recognise. What we heard about the discussion about charges, well, you have to bring in a totally separate bureaucracy. Once you start charging, who sets the charge, who collects the bill, who does the billing, who does the administration? The reason the NHS worked so well, as the Veterans Association in the US worked so well, is the overhead was 4%. 4%. Now, the US overhead, management and shareholder dividend and chief executive pay, 36% is taken out of the system just to run the system. So we are copying the most expensive, the most wasteful, the most bureaucratic system. All this nudging us into, wasted GP appointment times, that's nonsense too. If a patient of mine doesn't turn up, I don't sit there twiddling my thumbs. I've got results to look at, I've got letters to look at, there's plenty of work. So I'm afraid that's a tactic of nudging people to resent each other's health needs.
I can see that, to resent each other's health needs, but also to just surrender to the idea that it's broken and we're going to have to start paying to it. And then the nudge towards just £10, just £10, just £10.
Exactly.
And suddenly the gate is open for us all paying for it.
Look, anything is theoretically possible. You can make any claim you like about the future, but it doesn't mean that it's true or likely or realistic. For example, we heard a claim there, banks are going to start owning NHS hospitals. Now, that is just like, there's just not something that's on the cards. It's not legally possible. Now, yes, there can be private funding in financing of hospitals, and there had been in the past, and the Blair government made mistakes when it came to certain partnerships. But I just want to ask Bob a question. What proportion of the NHS is outsourced, is spent on private enterprises? What percentage?
There are various estimates.
No.
There's some ranging from about 10% to 20%. 10% administration charge, private finance initiative. HSBC, which is a bank, owns some of the PFI contracts.
So the truth is, and this is what the King's Fund say, who are the analysts
I'm just telling you, I'm proving to you, what you've just claimed as a fact is wrong. HSBC, a bank, owns private finance initiative contracts, which means they have ownership of the hospital.
No, they don't own the hospital.
So you are wrong.
Finance the hospital. That's like saying the bank owns your property because they have a mortgage on it.
The Institute of Economic Affairs is not an advocate of universal health care.
Well, that's not. That's not true. I'm telling you what I advocate for. You can tell me what I do or don't. But let's make this clear. So the NHS outsources, and this is what the King's Fund says, 7% of is purchasing private services, things like community pharmacies, things like ensuring sometimes getting operations done in a private hospital if the NHS is a bit overwhelmed. Now, that percentage hasn't changed. It was 7% in 2019, it's 7% in 2022, it was 7% back in 2012 when we got the Health and Social Care Act. The truth is that the amount of private sector involvement in the NHS is not changing. There have been talks about this plan to privatise the NHS for decades. My colleague Kristen Niemitz has gone through the articles. There's always a month to save the NHS, 6 months or 6 weeks to save the NHS.
So explain this to me, Matthew. Why did the 2012 Act in legislation allow NHS hospitals to earn 49% of their income from private patients? Why did they do that in legislation?
Did they do that?
Yes, they did.
They earned 49%.
49% potential from private patients.
Did that happen?
It's happening. Why do it otherwise? Why change the law?
So what that legislation enabled
and now
is...
we have the Health and Social Care Act 2022, which has created these managed care style organisations which will have fixed budgets and allowed to extract profit from money they're not spending on patients through the denial of care. So you need to get up to date.
This is complete nonsense. What's happened is there's been various restructures and attempts to introduce an internal market system into the NHS, an internal market system, so that you have within not you as a patient, but you as a system uses prices in order to signal certain things and to do a cost and set a budget for an organisation. Any organisation, any bureaucratic organisation has prices. It has prices as a way to coordinate and structure things. GBNews has a price system. It pays people's salaries. It has budgets. That's all this is. We're just talking about an internal market system within the NHS.
Which costs a lot to administer.
Well, of course, but any bureaucratic system costs a lot to administer. The question is about the efficiency.
No, it doesn't,
and it absolutely does.
Before the market reforms, I've told you the overhead was 4%.
But then we have to make a clear distinction here between the fact of there being market reforms and the NHS being privatised. These are two very different things. One is an internal structures of the NHS, which you can talk about for days, and maybe you're completely right. Maybe the system doesn't work. I don't know. You could potentially be right. But it's something very different to saying the NHS is about to be privatised.
Can I make this point, Bev? In 2012, this internal market that Matthew talks about as a totally benign condition was made into a compulsory external market by the Act of 2012. It's in the legislation, so everything had to be tendered out, right? So you do because it's against the public interest, because overwhelming public opinion, even Conservative voters, 70 to 80% want the NHS. They know it's politically toxic, so they have to do it by stealth. And people like Matthew have to come on the TV and say it's all about copying the Europeans.
Although, I think on the balance, I'm more with you, Bob. But I think what I'm hearing from you, Matthew, is that there isn't a great plan.
There isn't.
Take it out of public hands and put it entirely in private hands. So what is? If there is, I'm going to have you back to say. Well, I'll be lied about.
I'll be wrong. I mean, what I'm being told here
we
is.
need to go to a break, guys. But listen, we've got some time coming up. So how do we fund the NHS so there is still a world-class healthcare for all? We're going to carry this on after the break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Bev Turner. Our panel are very feisty tonight. It is a special Fixing the Nation on the NHS. But after this show, the great Patrick Christys is back.
Yes, I am, indeed. I can hear you guys arguing all the way throughout that advert break. That's not getting anything sorted anytime soon. But I missed you all. It's Friday night feast time, which can mean one thing and one thing only. From 7 until 9 p.m, it's absolute chaos and absolute carnage. I've got loads coming your way. It struck me that no one's actually bothered to ask an Albanian what Albania is like, so we've decided to go live to Albania to find out how rubbish or indeed otherwise that country really is. We're also going to be debating what to do about this energy crisis. Do you think that we should actually let Putin take hold of Ukraine so we can turn the taps back on? Do you think that people at the lower end of the economic spectrum just need to work a bit harder to pay their bills? Or actually, do you think the government needs to step in? Also, do you want to see me held at gunpoint, kidnapped, attacked with a chainsaw, a dog, and then have the police called on me? Because if you do, then that's coming up your way just after 7:30. Oh, and a magician is on as well to predict the result of the next Tory leadership election. Bobby Davro joins me, Richard Taylor joins me. It's going to be box office. I'll see you at 7.
Oh, it's so nice to have you back, Patrick Christys. Now, listen, back to our panel. With me until 7 o'clock are Dr. Bob Gill, NHS doctor, and also the director of the documentary, The Great NHS Heist. If you like what Bob's had to say tonight and you want to know more, do check that out. And also Matthew Lesh, head of public policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Now, since April, we've all been paying more in national insurance as part of the government's plan to fund the NHS. However, from next April 2023, national insurance will go back to its old rate. There will then be a new health and social care levy, which will also be paid by pensioners who are still working. So this new levy is basically yet another tax. Is that the right way to go, or is it time to find a new model? So you've been sending in your opinions to me. Thank you very much. Nigel has said, just remember the Tories in 1948 voted against the formation of the NHS. Are they nowadays for it, or are they still against it? That's always a suspicion. I'm going to ask Matthew in a minute about that. Michael, the ageing population have financially supported the NHS all their working lives. It's the current free during the break about that. And you are absolutely convinced that this is a very slippery slope down to a complete privatisation, and it's happening with nudges.
Yeah, so in fact, government has something called the nudge unit. Insights, which is part public and part private, as is everything these days.
Behavioural science unit.
Behavioural science.
Yeah.
Similarly, this hypothetication of tax, this
ring fencing.
The ring fencing. There's not such a big leap to say, well, you've got to take out a top-up insurance, right? So none of this is happening by accident. Why didn't they just raise general taxation? Because that doesn't make the point of the nudging. So the more we blame the sick, the more we talk about elderly people living too long, that's another fallacy. Because the amount of time when you're older, the amount of months you're alive when you're dependent, heavily dependent, has not changed. The people are living longer and healthier lives. They're contributing to childcare. Some of them are still working. They're still paying indirect taxation. So these are people contributing to society that the right-wingers are quite happy to demonise as a burden on society. And why should we, somehow there's the reason we need to switch healthcare provision. So we need to be very careful. These sort of talking points are very cleverly thought out, Blame time wasters, start charging people for missing appointments, look at how many old people we got, what about immigration? And then you break down social cohesion. And if you start to alienate the middle classes, bring in prescription charges, you're working, you're paying taxes, and you think, well, I'm not using it, why don't I just look after myself?
Yeah, and all that rings very true. I can't lie, Matthew. I feel like that you've just described exactly what has gone on in my mind. I've clearly been nudged. But also, I would say, not only have I been nudged, my own lived experience of the NHS is that it is no longer working properly. We can't get post-COVID an appointment with the GP. You might be able to get one online, but frankly, that's sort of pointless. If you've got a child and they want them to take their temperature, whatever it is. And then I had an incident not long ago with one of my children where I wanted to get to see a GP. We couldn't for a week, so I took them in the end to A&E. Couldn't see anybody there. So I picked up my phone because I was lucky and I could find a private GP nearby, and I paid 60 quid. We were in and out in an hour and it was done. And that for me was so upsetting, actually. Yes, I was in the fortunate position that I could pay that 60 quid to get my child sorted out, but not everyone can do that, Matthew, and that is what people are currently struggling with.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that the promise of the NHS is something that's been overdone in terms of an organisation that's overpromised and underdelivered. The sense of the NHS is that it is this highly bureaucratic, highly centralised system that doesn't have particularly good incentives or structural organisations, and quite frankly, the state is not particularly good at managing big organisations. It's very difficult to do, as you said at the start. It's 1.7 million people you're trying to coordinate, and inevitably there are going to be failures in that process, and there are going to be inefficiencies. And I think anyone who's worked in the NHS can tell you about that. Now, I don't think there's some grand conspiracy or some grand idea to try to ruin the NHS. I'm going to give our politicians the benefit of the doubt. Now, I really do think that they like the NHS, they want the NHS to work. They put a lot of money into the NHS. They've tried different structures and different mechanisms for organising the NHS. Now, I don't think that has worked. Now, I think this is where the failure is. It's underlying the very underlying ideas of the NHS. And it's not because of some idea that they want to destroy the NHS. That would be politically just insanely dumb thing to do.
Well, it depends how quickly you do it. And Bob would say, if this has been a drip, drip, drip over several years, starting with who?
You'd have to... Margaret Thatcher, then in 1988...
Oh, that is quite a long time.
1988, you had Oliver Letwin and John Redwood. Before they were MPs, they were at the privatisation unit of a bank. They produced a document called Britain's Biggest Enterprise. It set out how you go from a state-funded, state-run system to an insurance system.
And then, of course, we had Jeremy Hunt, and the suspicion around Jeremy Hunt is that he's always wanted to privatise it.
But these claims are repeatedly made, and I just don't think they stick up to reality or to fact. Now, I personally am, and I think I'm an exception when I say I do genuinely think that there could be a role for a social insurance system like they have in Germany, or the model they have in some Scandinavian countries, or my home country in Australia, where we have a very good public healthcare system, publicly funded, publicly organised healthcare system, as well as a complementary private system, and they both operate simultaneously very successfully.
Could it be, Matthew, that there is a great plan to privatise it, but you just don't know about it?
Well, I mean, I don't know who doesn't know about this great plan. You can't just keep making a claim that there is some plan that doesn't exist.
Let me enlighten you, Matthew. Simon Stevens, who was the chief executive of NHS England for 7 years, in 2012 was at the World Economic Forum advocating the American managed care system for the whole developed world. So Australia, the rest of Europe, it's easy to flip from a Bismarck European system to a managed care system because they're already halfway there. Whatever you say about the European models, they cost more to administer. There's a charging system.
And yet fewer people seem to die in them.
They've been spending a lot more than we have as a percentage of GDP for decades. They have a massively better infrastructure, but they do waste.
Maybe the better infrastructure comes as the virtue of having a social insurance system.
No, it's about
maybe the fact that the people make a contribution to it as well as the state. Maybe their models are actually very successful and ensure that people are...
You're advocating to introduce a whole layer of bureaucracy and somehow that's more efficient. We've been sold by the right wing this market efficiency nonsense. It's total nonsense.
We've only got 30 seconds, but is it nonsense anywhere, or is it just nonsense in healthcare? Because we have to have a moral dimension.
In all natural monopolies, healthcare is a natural monopoly. And when you introduce market, when you introduce buyer and seller, you introduce perverse incentives, and you push up bureaucracy. It's a zombie policy that he's advocating.
If the last 2 years have taught us anything, Matthew, it's that perverse financial incentives make people do things which are not always for the benefit of the greater good.
You're gonna have to tell me what you mean by that.
Oh, I mean drug companies, and I mean the fact that we haven't got time. We haven't got time. We're gonna have to carry this on in the green room. Listen, thank you all for joining me. Michelle will be back on Monday. Thank you very much to Dr. Bob Gill and Matthew Lesh. If you missed any of today's show, you want to get it on catch up, download the app. The app is brilliant. You can also get the podcast of today's show wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great bank holiday weekend. Friday Night Feast is coming up at the top of the hour.
Hello, I'm Alex Deacon with your latest weather update. The weekend, 3-day one for many of us. Promises largely dry and fine weather with sunny spells across much of the UK and feeling quite warm, certainly on Saturday and Sunday afternoon. A bit of a chilly one tonight, however. We do have this weather front draped across the west. It's fizzling out through this evening, but it's still providing 1 or 2 heavy showers here and there at the moment. But those showers are fading as that weather front dies away. For most, it's going to be dry and with clear skies across western Scotland, Northern Ireland. It's only quite chilly here. Temperatures dropping down into single figures. Further east, again, mostly a fine night. Could be a bit misty with 1 or 2 fog patches over East Anglia in the southeast. Temperatures holding up here in the teens. On to Saturday's detail, and it's not completely dry. There will still be a few showers, mostly scattered across northern parts of England, but 1 or 2 over the Midlands and perhaps even across southern England also. But for most places, you're not going to see those showers. It's going to stay dry and fine with sunny spells. It will cloud over in the northwest later on. Temperature-wise, a little higher perhaps than Friday's temperatures. High teens across much of Scotland, elsewhere into the 20s, the mid-20s in the south. Still the odd shower here and there through the evening, but most places dry. We will see a bit more of that rain just pushing into the Highlands and the Western Isles during Saturday evening. Elsewhere, it's going to be a dry and a clear night. Again, a bit of mist and fog. It's possible on Sunday. And Sunday is again, for most of us, a dry, bright day with decent spells of sunshine. Starting quite grey in the northwest. Patchy rain here tending to fizzle out. And again, 1 or 2 showers are possible, most likely over parts of northeast England. But most dry. Temperatures a little higher, 20 Celsius widely into the mid-20s across much of South Wales, the Midlands and southern England as well. Monday also set fair by and large, a little cooler in the east. And one thing, the winds will be picking up, especially along the south coast of England come Monday.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us